17% of people might find their podcasts on social media, but there's a big difference between finding something and becoming engaged to that something. And I have not found a better way than social media to really, really engage the audience. Podcast Growth Nation, welcome back to another very special, as always, episode of Podcast Growth University, where we talk all things podcasting all the time. I hope you enjoyed the latest episode number 39, a deep dive into why you should be doing solo episodes. Any chance I get to talk about Hot Ones, the YouTube show, that's going to be an interesting episode. I hope you enjoyed that one. Today, for episode number 40, social media matters for different reasons than you think. So I went to PodFest a couple months ago, and I heard several things that I just don't believe. That for me, I guess my thought process is the opposite. One of those things was YouTube is a waste of time. I don't think so. I think YouTube is a great platform to leverage, especially if you're just testing it out, throwing up your clips, throwing up your episodes, not editing it, just throwing it up there, right? Extra eyes for free are valuable eyes for free is my thought. And the second thing I heard, and I heard this from many people, social media is a waste of time, and it doesn't really matter when it comes to your podcast. So I'm going to dive into a couple different things here. Now, number one, I have an article up from Buzzsprout. So Buzzsprout is the host platform that we use, and it's just buzzsprout.com /blog/podcast statistics. And it just goes kind of through the trends, and it just updates a lot of the data. How many people are listening on mobile? Where do people listen? Are they listening in the car? That type of thing. And one of the interesting things that I found was under podcast discovery trends. 30% of new podcast listeners search the internet to find new shows. 19% ask friends and family for podcast recommendations. 17% use social media. Now, so I guess if you were to think of it this way, 17 out of every 100 people who find your podcast are going to find it from social media. But that's not necessarily suggesting that you can't do more to raise that number. 30% of new podcast listeners search the internet to find shows. Love that. That's great, right? That's why we're going to have a website. That's why we're going to make sure our episodes are titled correctly. That's why having a blog or having transcripts can help. Great. I love that. But there's only so much the average podcaster is going to do to increase search engine optimization and all that. The one thing you can control is social media. That's why I'm such a big fan of social media in the ways that I'm going to talk about it today. So it matters for different reasons than you think. I have a lot of clients who, when we're talking about social media content, right? So part of what we do for our clients is we break things down into teaser clips that have cutscenes and music and subtitles and all that stuff. A lot of people will say, honestly, is that really that important? Like, are people going to see that and come directly to the show? And I'll say, yes, some people will. But the reason we're putting that up on social media, it's way more than just, I hope somebody sees this and says, I'd like to listen to that full episode. One, it's credibility. If you have really high quality social media posts, it automatically adds credibility to your brand and to your podcast. That's number one. Number two, you're consistently adding value, which is obviously important when it comes to social media. But here's number three. Social media is the best place for you to get your potential listeners to self-identify. I care what you post. I think posting consistently is important, and it's valuable, and it helps to increase engagement and all that stuff. But many people are just posting on social media, and then they're just saying, well, if people are going to find the podcast, they're going to find the podcast, and then maybe they'll reach out. I would argue that 17% of people that are finding their podcasts on social media, you could get that number up if you are proactive. So just as an example, the other night, Alan, my business partner for Next Level University, him and I were on Zoom. And we have, as I mentioned in one of our other episodes, we have a list. So we have a giant list of everybody who has worked with us in some capacity at Next Level University. They're on the mailing list. They've attended live events, whatever it may be. The reason we have that list is because when somebody self-identifies as a piece of your business, obviously it's important to make sure that you remember that. So I was going through my social media, because we were thinking of, okay, who are the new listeners that we haven't added to the list? Let's make sure we get everybody. So I was going through my social media and I did two things. One, I looked at the people who had liked my recent posts. Two, I looked at the people who had viewed my story on Instagram specifically. This is what I did. I went through my story and I just sent some messages and said, hey, blank, I hope you're doing well. That's it. Simple, nothing crazy, just simple. After I did that, I actually had several people respond to me and say, oh my goodness, I can't believe you've messaged me. I've been listening to your podcast for a year. I listen to your podcast every day. I actually had somebody say, I'm fangirling so hard right now because I love you and Alan and I love the podcast. I never, ever, ever would have known that person was a listener if I didn't message them on social media. I never would know. I would never have any idea. There's a huge difference between somebody discovering your podcast and you engaging with the people that discover your podcast. That's why I think many people are, I don't want to say losing sight. They're not sure of how much value social media actually brings to them. Because where else are you going to have conversations with your community? Yeah, you can do it through the mailing list, but it's not the same. Yeah, you can do it in a Facebook group, but it's still not the same because it's not private. There's something about being behind the scenes. I had another really good interaction with a listener today. This person reached out to me and said, hey, I want to sign up for group coaching. And what do I do? Like, how do I do that? And I sent them an audio message on Instagram. And they said, wow, it's so weird hearing you in my DMs because I listen to you every day on the podcast. That relationship will never be the same because we're having a conversation behind the scenes on social media. So I think for a lot of people, we get lost in, well, this thing only got 15 likes. Well, that's fine. That's great. 15 likes is great. Cool. Now we message those 15 people and we start a relationship with them. Not from a place of, hey, are you listening to the podcast? It's just, hey, Kevin, I hope you're doing well, my friend. Something simple like that. We go and we look at our story. Who is watching our story? Interesting. Who's watching all of our stories? Interesting. Then when you start to make a list, it's like, oh, this person watches my story every day. Okay. They're at least aware of the podcast. If I start a conversation, they might self-identify and say, oh, I love your podcast. So the thought for me behind social media is posting is great. And it's important and you should be consistent because it's going to help the brand and the business ultimately. That's part one. Part two is the more conversations you have going on social media, the more successful you will ultimately be. Because again, a lot of people who win at podcasting, they don't necessarily know how they did it. They don't really know. I mean, maybe they got in really early or they had a really good name. And a lot of people, it was easy for them to search that, right? That's definitely something. But they don't have to do stuff like this, which I know that sounds like a good thing, right? Well, they don't have to put in the extra work. But this is the interesting thing. If you understand the value of one listener, it's worth you sending a 1-minute audio message to somebody who sends you a DM. It's worth it. It's super valuable. And there's really nowhere else to do it. Social media is the best place to do it. That's the biggest thing I can think of when it comes to why social media matters more than most people realize and for different reasons. I think for a lot of us, it's like, oh, I'm going to throw something up and then that's kind of the end of it. Okay. That's a thought. Here's the other thing too. My view of this is different than many. This is what's worked for me. This is what I've seen work for clients. So that's really all I can go off of. Social media is going to help you relate to your audience. So here's the interesting thing. We've talked about the brand. We've talked about the business. We've talked about the emotion that you want the podcast and the brand to deliver to your community. Social media, if I post a picture of my cat, one of my two cats, Fudge or Ace, my little kitty boys, somebody who likes cats might come across my social media page and say, oh, Kevin has 2 kittens. Wow, they're so cute. I'm going to follow Kevin because I like cat content. And in 6 months, they might say, oh, wow, I didn't realize Kevin had a podcast. Let me give this a listen. It's very hard to measure that, but it would never happen without the social media. So for me, I like to treat social media more as a personal brand. Not everything has to be a 10 out of 10 valuable post because a picture of me and my wife is valuable contextually, because our brand is also about relationships. So a happy relationship suggests value to our audience, right?
I just wanted to take a quick second and give a shout out and a huge thank you to Next Level Podcasting Solutions, Kevin and his team. They have been incredible to work with, very flexible, on the spot with any questions that I have or any concerns that I have. When I first started out my podcast, I was doing everything on my own. I have no editing background. I have no podcasting background. I knew nothing about it. And so I was bootstrapping all of this myself while I was still trying to take on my role as a full-time mom. And once I met up with Kevin and we had these discussions and I got on board with adding an editing team, oh my goodness, it just lifted this weight off of me. It lifted my time that I was spending doing my editing. And in the beginning, full transparency, when I was editing just my individual recordings, it was a little more manageable, not super manageable. And then when I started doing my interviews for the podcast, it was hours upon hours of me doing the editing that didn't include any of the promotional material that I am now getting from Kevin and his team. It wouldn't have been sustainable. I would not have been able to keep up with that. So I recommend Kevin and his team. They have done wonderful work in helping me grow my podcast. I have really enjoyed working with the editing team, and it definitely feels like more of a team environment versus me hiring them to do a specific job. I mean, we all work collaboratively on the projects that I have, and I have these crazy ideas sometimes, and they come up with a solution to fit my needs. I can't recommend them enough. I've really enjoyed working with them. Kevin and the Next Level Podcasting Solutions, thank you so much for the work that you have done in the past and are continuing to do for me. I'm growing this community and growing this platform with a beautiful team that is working for me and with me to see my vision and help that come to life. So thank you again so much. I really appreciate you guys.
So it's also that understanding of, you don't just want to post podcast content, because if somebody doesn't resonate with your podcast content, they're not ever going to end up in the community. Where if you post about your life and somebody relates to you traveling to Italy, you have pictures of you traveling to Italy, and people relate to that, they might give you a follow. And then who knows, if they're watching, right? If they're watching your story, then you send them a message and say, hey, thank you so much for whatever, watching my story. Or, hey, how are you? Hey, I hope you're having a great week. Hey, I saw on your profile you just bought a house. Congrats. Then you can actually build a real authentic relationship with that person. So I think a lot of us are just, it's post it and then forget about it. It's set it and then forget it. And then from there, we wonder why the show isn't growing at the rate we want it to. So yeah, 17% of people might find their podcasts on social media, but there's a big difference between finding something and becoming engaged to that something. And I have not found a better way than social media to really, really engage the audience. Now, obviously, there's only so much you can do there before somebody has to come into your business and then they work their way through. But I think a lot of us, we're leaving impact on the table. We're leaving money on the table. We're leaving listens on the table. The other thing too is when you start to, well, let me frame it this way. I've talked about this in the past. I believe I've talked about it on the show. The 3 buckets of podcast listeners. I think I did that early on. You have cold eyes. These are people who don't know you. They don't like you. They don't trust you. You have warm eyes. These are people who, listen to the show. Let's just say it like that. And then you have lost eyes. And your lost eyes are people, they have a good relationship with you. They know you, they like you, they trust you, but they just forgot about you, right? That's one of the reasons social media is so valuable. If you're a podcaster and you used to get reached out to a bunch, and you do not know the name of the people who used to reach out to you, how do you re-engage them? It's very hard to do. So what I would suggest is whatever platforms you're using, again, I do most of this on Instagram, but we're kind of leaning into Facebook because Facebook has been really good for us lately. Go back into your DMs for like a year, and everybody who reached out to you, I want you to send them a message and just say, hey, blank, I hope you're doing well, and see what happens. Some people will ghost you. Some people might say, hey, congrats, it looks like you're doing so well. Some people will say, hey, I've been listening to the show. It's awesome. people are self-identifying, then you can kind of go from there. Social media is not just about adding value in terms of the posts on your feed. It's about adding value by giving attention, by giving time, by giving intention to the valuable members of your community. And again, I have not found a better way than social media to do that. So that's the big reason to me why I believe social media matters for different reasons than you think. I think there's also another interesting perspective of getting over, I won't say getting over, dealing with the fear of judgment. When you are putting stuff about yourself on social media, there's an unseen, potentially unfelt confidence that you start to gain, and that's very important. And I'm happy to do more episodes on stuff like that, like the inner stuff. I'm actually going to do that for the next episode. But that's another thing. Seeing yourself on social media, seeing yourself on video, hearing your own voice, that type of stuff is very, very valuable. I would say drastically underappreciated when it comes to importance. So that's another thing. So if you're not using social media to build a real, authentic relationship with your audience, I would say you're missing out on a lot. Yes, maybe it's 17% of people that find their podcasts via social media, but I'm telling you, there is a higher number that a percentage gets the relationship built on social media. That percentage is way higher than 17%, way higher. I'm certain of that because all the clients I've worked with, it's literally like I tell them the same thing. And this is what's happened. I had a client who came to me and said, "Hey, I want to get one-on-one coaching clients." And I was like, "Okay, what is your rate?" And they said, "I'm going to charge I think it was $199 an hour." And I was like, "All right, cool. That's good because your audience has money. Perfect." First question I asked, "How many people are you talking to in your DMs right now?" And they're like, not that many. It's like, all right, cool. Let's look. So on the call with this client, I literally went, they screen shared, and then I took control of their screen on Zoom, and we went through their DMs. And it's like, oh, this person reached out to you. Interesting. Okay, nurture that relationship. Oh, this person is somebody who looks like they're very ready to work with you. All right, let's try to ask a couple questions to see if that's true. That was all done through social media. All of that. And that person ended up having, I don't know how many clients over the next couple weeks, right? But at a $200 price point, $200 an hour, you can make a lot of money pretty quickly when you are building relationships consistently. So that's kind of this practice or this thought in practice. And then the absolute last thing I'll say, I know I say that often. The last thing I will say is it's you taking the time. I kind of already said this, but I want to reiterate it. You taking the time to send somebody a personal message on social media is extremely valuable contextually. The fact that somebody said, "I listen to you every day and I can't believe I'm hearing your voice in my DMs," or "I'm fangirling so hard right now." All that really means is I can't believe what's happening right now is actually happening, which means that relationship with that listener will never be the same again. The relationship with that family member, as we call our listeners, our community, that will never be the same again because I went above and beyond what you expected, right? If you go above and beyond, then people are not going to forget that. One of my favorite quotes is you hear people talk a lot about under promise and over deliver. I like just promise and over deliver. You don't have to under promise. Promise that you're going to add value every single day on your podcast, then over deliver by adding value in the DMs, adding value on your feed, adding value in your Facebook group, whatever it may be. So that's the last thing I'll say for this episode. Yes, social media is important. Yes, posting is important. Maybe 17% of people are going to find your podcast that way, but if you are in your DMs, you're going to build relationships and get more listeners that way. And here's the interesting thing. I lied. I said that was the last thing. This is the last thing. When you build relationships with people via social media, aren't they more likely to refer you? If word of mouth and internet search are the top two ways, and I think word of mouth is huge, isn't the best way to get word of mouth to add more value to people? Yes. If you go above and beyond and differentiate yourself, that's a way that people are going to share. That's a way that you're going to get referrals. So I wanted to make sure I added that. Whew. Podcast Growth Nation. As always, if you are interested in doing a free call, a free 30-minute podcast breakthrough session, just click the link in the show notes. I actually have one in 14 minutes after this episode. I have to get ready for one. Not going to sell you on anything. I just want to add value. It'll be a lot like a podcast episode, except way more specific. Next week for episode number 41, the importance of messy action. There are a couple types of people when it comes to this. We have perfectionists. We have people who just throw stuff against the wall and see what sticks. So we're going to talk about that and figure out what type of person you are and how that is affecting the results you are getting. As always, I appreciate you all very much. 40 episodes in and just getting started. As always, keep on crushing it. Keep on podcasting. Keep on growing the business. Keep on connecting with the listeners. Keep on doing all the right things. And I will talk to you all next week.